What is up? Thank you for tuning in to the MMA Podcast 152, a special Christmas edition of the show. We have a very special guest, none other than Santa Claus, joining us for the festivities. And of course, this past weekend, we had that UFC on Fox card. Dos Anjos versus Cerrone fighting for the lightweight belt. Nate Diaz versus Michael Johnson. Alistair Overeem against Junior Dos Santos. Going to be breaking down all of that along with the weekly news in MMA. ONE FC's got some new fighter protocol, previewing next week's TMP 2016 awards. Thank you for tuning in. Let's do it, people.
We did it, mama. We did it. We did it for the love of the game. We did it, mama. We did it. I did it for. Yeah. We did it, mama. We did it. The game will never be the same. We did it, mama. We did it. I did it for.
You're listening to the MMA Podcast.
What is going on, people? It is a special Christmas edition of the MMA Podcast. We appreciate you tuning in. As always, at least of recently, we are joined by your co-host P Money on Twitter at Sweet Pappy Jones. What's going on, man?
Big Jake, it is a lovely Christmas Eve here in Southern California. So stoked to be here with you doing episode 152 of the MMA Podcast. And it's lovely. We're looking at some fantastic weather for the season coming up here in Southern California, and hyped to break it down. We had a nice UFC on Fox 17, and looking forward to breaking that action down with you and seeing what's coming up for the MMA Podcast.
Definitely, yeah. It's actually officially Christmas Eve over in Florida on the East Coast. Not exactly going to be a white Christmas here. Pretty muggy. It's like 80 degrees, 90% humidity. I was driving back from the grocery store at like 7 or 8, and it wasn't raining, but the windshield wipers were on. It was so muggy. As usual, you can visit us at themmmapodcast.com. Don't pay attention to the content on the site because I'm a lazy fuck who hasn't updated it since May. But those links at the top still work, and you can still find our channels on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud. Go and check out recent episodes. And yeah, I'm looking forward to hopping on UFC on Fox as well. But it looks like our guest, tonight's special guest, we've tried to book him before, and he's usually very busy around this time of year. I'm really stoked he was able to fit our humble podcast into his plans. But for the first time ever on the MMA Podcast, we have Santa Claus on the line with us. Santa, how are you doing? How are things up in the North Pole?
Thanks, Jack and Pat. Ho ho horrors. Merry Christmas to everyone. Everything's going great. Nothing could be worse, better in my entire life. This is a great honor. I'm just getting everything prepped and ready for the big night tomorrow. Just drinking that eggnog, shooting up the black tar heroin, just making sure everything's okay, and watching the MMA.
Yeah, and I was sort of surprised when you agreed to do our show. I guess you agreed to do it because you are a fan of MMA and the UFC and all that. I wanted to ask you what you thought about a couple recent events and goings on. But first, I mean, we have Santa on the line. There are so many questions, about Rudolph and the North Pole. I wish I could get to him on, but I know get to them all, but I know you're very busy, so I'll keep it short. Santa, you go to, I think it's approximately 2 to 3 billion different households in 24 hours. I mean, how do you do this? What sort of technology are you using to get into every household, down every fireplace?
Of course. This is a common misconception. See, the problem is that my whole existence is based upon the fact that Jesus Christ actually walked the earth and was a live human being. I don't have to go to billions of houses on Christmas because the fact is, the only people that actually believe in Jesus Christ and Christmas are either for the large part, in North America and Mexico. So when you actually do the math and then you factor in who's been naughty and nice, what it boils down to is that most kids are selfish pricks who don't deserve anything. So I actually only have to make 12 deliveries this year. That's down from about 24 last year.
Wow,
Most people
trending
are pieces of
downward,
shit,
Santa.
and not to mention mixed races, Muslims, and of course the Jews, the bastard Jews, like my son Ross, but that's a different story. But yeah, I don't have to really deliver that many gifts. The problem is, though, I do force the reindeer to fly. You mentioned Rudolph, the red-nosed reindeer. Sometimes when the deer won't take off or they break their legs in the air
Oh no.
miraculously while flying, sometimes you have to put them down, ho, 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 ho. And the only reason he's called Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is because of, occasionally you have to put one through your eyes. But
Wow.
other than that, it's a pretty easy night. I mean, I'm drinking eggnog right now, just prepping the shotgun because one of them's got to go.
Wow, I was expecting a answer about magic and the spirit of Christmas, but that answer was way more bleak than I thought it would be. You did mention the naughty nice thing, and before we get to the UFC, I did want to ask really quickly, Santa. Have me and P Money been naughty or nice this year? I feel like I've been relatively nice. I haven't done too many terrible things, but am I on the naughty list? Am I on the nice list?
I'm looking through the files right now, but what I'm seeing right now is enough to know that you're both steaming piles of human garbage and shit, and don't deserve any happiness whatsoever in this life. But I'll throw P Money a cigar. I know he likes that. I'm a nice guy. And
Good looking
Jake,
out, Santa.
What about
I'll
me?
call in a few favors and get you through law school. And that's
Oh
just on
yeah.
me. That's just because I've had a little bit of eggnog and black tar heroin straight in my veins. But
Wow.
yeah, nobody deserves anything in this life. You have to work for it. That's just some advice from Santa.
Once again, the real Santa Claus, a far stretch from what I originally expected. Santa, I know you came on the show because you wanted to talk MMA, so we will get straight to it. UFC 194 was the capstone card of the year. You had two title fights: Luke Rockhold taking the belt from Chris Weidman, Conor McGregor taking that undisputed belt from Jose Aldo. Things are busy around this time of the year up there, but were you able to watch those cards, and what did you think about it?
Of course, Santa likes mixed martial arts. I mean, I train every day. It doesn't show, but then again, just look at what's his name, Big Country.
Big country,
Uh,
Roy Nelson.
sure. Yes, that he's actually a distant relative, believe it or not. Um, but no, look, let's all be real here. Luke Rockhold versus Weidman. That was a shoot. That was a real fight. Um, everybody kind of knew that Weidman was, well, let's face it, he's powerful. He was enough to beat Anderson, but he's slow. He's slow, and he's lazy, and he had a family. And when that happens, your mind goes someplace else. So of course, he was going to lose. I didn't predict that. I predicted absolutely nothing. It was going to be an even fight. They kept it real. because the main event was all that mattered, which was Jose Aldo versus Conor McGregor. And ho ho ho, it was a work, people. One punch knockout. I'm sorry, I wouldn't even lie to a kid on my lap about that present. I wouldn't even gift wrap that shit. That was a work 100%. You can watch the video again. Jose Aldo allowed himself to get knocked out. You can see him even go down on his knee, which if you're going to face plant, I'm sorry, your knee's not going to hit the canvas first. It's called a face plant for a reason. Look at the video again. He takes an obvious dive. He comes in swinging wide. He didn't want to play the UFC's game and drag it out 5 rounds just to get his ass beaten and embarrassed by this white sensation that speaks English. And I'm sorry, after the Ronda Rousey loss, the UFC doesn't have that much star power to rely on. So it is a Merry Christmas for Jose Aldo's bank account. I would bet every elf I have in my closet. But yes, people, it was a work.
Man, Santa Claus, have we ever spoken before? You sound like I can't put a finger on it, but I feel like we've talked before.
No, Jake. No, sir. This is the first time I've ever called into any sort of podcast or spoken live on any sort of public forum, and I have no idea who you are or what's happening right now. Like I said, I've just had a lot of eggnog and heroin.
Just a couple more questions before I let you get back to your black tar heroin and eggnog. Home Rousey. That was the other big card of this fall that went down a few years ago, and it sounded like you were thinking that Conor Aldo might have been a work. I was hearing similar whispers about that fight. What did you think of that women's fight that went down in Australia?
Well, the problem is, if you put all your eggs in one basket, or if you bet all your money, you're going to be inclined to believe that the outcome you want is going to happen. That is gambling. It's an addiction.
Hello, Santa. Do we still have you there, Santa?
Santa, are you in line? He dropped out.
He might have been nodding off from that black tar, Jake. It really sounds like Santa was going hard on that black tar. I'm quite shocked by what we heard from Santa Claus, Kris Kringle.
I was expecting more of a cheery, bright
Yuletide.
That was eye-opening.
Yeah, I mean, I wish we just had a little more time with Santa. It seemed very interesting. I really like to know more about the definitions of naughty and nice. I mean, if black tar can somehow still be included in the nice category, that's wow.
I swear maybe I sat on Santa's lap as a kid once and talked to him, but that voice sounded eerily similar.
I was wondering if he'd worked the Southern California mall circuit.
Yep.
I was getting something there too.
I'm sure. Well, I guess Santa is gone, and we thank him for coming on the show. But shit, I guess that brings us to this most recent card we had: Dos Anjos versus Cerrone 2 going down in Orlando, Florida. A fight that I actually wasn't able to catch as much of the prelims as I wanted to, as I was traveling, but I was able to go back and watch some of the card. I saw the no contest between Cole Miller and Jim Allers. And I didn't mention it at the top of the show, but if I sound extra nasally, I do apologize. I was in bed sick all freaking day. I'm about to take another Alka-Seltzer here. My sinuses are fucked.
Oh, we good, bro. We good.
Oh, we
We're
good?
not at
No.
Fran Drescher levels yet.
No. That was a terrible Fran Drescher. Nick Lentz over Danny Castillo, and what I thought was the most underrated fight, because both of these guys are absolute beasts. Tamden McCrory coming back to the UFC after a long break, defeating the very game and athletic Josh Salmon by third round sub. Putting a exclamation point on the return of the Barn Cat. Valentina Shevchenko defeating Sarah Kaufman via a pretty close split decision. Two judges seeing it 29-28 toward Shevchenko and one toward Kaufman. Nate Marquardt, man, I hate that I picked against him, and picked against him with gusto. I think I said he had zero chance, and this is one of my favorite fighters of all time. So I was kicking myself and smiling at the same time, seeing Nate Marquardt rally against. You want to talk about game fighters? CB Dalloway, yeah, he has struggled to really get himself into the elite of the middleweight division, but that guy can put on a fight. And Nate Marquardt showing off that KO power 28 seconds into the second round, defeating CB Dalloway. Charles Oliveira at a catchweight fight, 150.5. I don't know what was up with that scale. I watched the weigh-ins, and it was very strange. You had three different fighters claim they made weight on the official scale backstage and not make weight when it came down to it. Oliveira missing weight, but getting the guillotine choke on Miles Jury in the first round. And I'll go ahead and lump the Carolina Kowalkiewicz versus Ronda Marcos fight. I don't know why I almost said Yoel Romero instead of Randa Marcos. It was a unanimous decision. I think it could have gone either way. I think actually more media members scored it toward Randa Marcos. Both of these women deserve to be in the top 10 at women's strawweight. But it was Carolina who ended up getting the decision here unanimously. I don't agree with the 30-27. I think you got to put it 29-28 either way. I think Randa won the second round, Carolina won the third round. That first round is up for debate depending on how you score it. But Carolina ends up getting the nod over Randa Marcos. What did you think of these prelims?
I mean, it was a solid set of prelims for this. What was the last UFC card for 2015 UFC on Fox 17? Starting off on Fight Pass with Francis Gano, I believe his last name is pronounced, knocking out Luis Enrique with a sweet left cross, I believe it was. Or no, maybe I might be getting that mixed up with the overarm knockout there. I definitely want to say it was some form of uppercut involved there. Nice fight, Gano showing some promise as a prospect at heavyweight. Was able to survive some groundwork by Luis Enrique in the first round, and I want to say it was even able to work his way back up to ground. He wasn't, or work his way back up to standing. Wasn't just grounded out for the entire first round. So decent there. Vicente Luque with a sweet submission over Hyder Hassan. That was a great anaconda, getting the job done real early. Had Hassan like twitching and convulsing there. Not the best way to go out. Not a good look. Glad Hassan's all right there. Yeah, there was a lot of good fights. Definitely love seeing Tamden McCrory come back out. I think we talked about it. Yeah. Last week on 151, mentioning McCrory, a metalhead had came out to Dimmu Borgir, and thus I was rooting for him. And man, he got the job done, looking real slick on the ground. That time off seems to have benefited him. He's definitely, I'd say, more athletically in his prime at 29 for combat sports than perhaps at 23, growing into some of that man strength, as it were. letting that time on the mats training uh, do its benefit. And hey, he had that competition on the big stage in the UFC already going in there, so it's not like he had the UFC jitters. Got a couple big wins in Bellator as well. So national coverage, he'd been back in there and was able to transition nicely. And man, speaking of transitions, those submissions, he was chaining them together, fluid. I was kind of amazed he was able to end up getting the submission just because uh, Josh Saman, or I don't know if it's Salmon or Saman. I feel like even the UFC announcers keep flip flopping on that. But either way, he was avoiding them very well, thus necessitating McRory's multiple attempts to switch submissions there. But yeah, McRory third round, late in the round or late in the game too, when everybody's getting more tired, sweaty. He's able to lock it in, get a nice triangle choke there. Um, yeah, there was a good action. My boy Nate Marquardt, huge underdog, coming in there knocking out CB Dalloway. It was crazy he was as big of an underdog as he was entering that fight. Granted, he didn't have the best record going into the fight, but still, Nate Marquardt, he is the great, and you got to put him over the Doberman. Come on now, that's uh, that's just good science. Oliveira, yeah, the whole scale thing, man. If he actually was 145 pounds on a different scale, I wish I could have brought out the different scale. Be like, hey, let's solve this shit right now. Let's pull out the scale from the back, and or hey, do
Leave
the
it to
two out.
Florida to fuck everything up.
I mean, come on, son. All the nuts rolled downhill. Present company excluded, Jakey. Um, but however, it ended up working out. Oliveira got a great submission. He handled Miles Jury very thoroughly, very quickly in the first round. And Miles Jury, I was surprised he was moving down to 145 pounds in the first place. Ended up making the weight. Did not look too bad, I thought, coming into that fight. But man, Oliveira has shown why he's always a threat. He's got nasty submission with his Muay Thai game, or nasty striking with his Muay Thai game, and his submissions as well. We've seen how creative he gets. He's very dangerous, working all different kinds of submissions. I want to say he's got a quite the different variety of submissions, and he put it on Miles Jury. And yeah, it was just a great card overall. I thought to end the year. I was kind of debating, whether or not they had any star power left after the 3 cards in 3 days that we had the week prior to this card, but they were still able to stack it fairly nicely. Some good names, and everybody really came to put on a good scrap. I really appreciated it, and yeah, the Random Marcos Karolina Kowalkiewicz fight. I do seem to remember everybody on Twitter thinking Randa had won. Um, the house was a little bit of a hectic scene. It's a pre-holiday situation. This was the big Fox card, so opted to stay home and watch this one. And things got a little hectic though. I wasn't able to pay the closest attention and give my judging officially there. But man, Random Marcos and Kowalkiewicz, like you said, Jake, they're both definitely tough girls. Definitely in the top 10, I would say, for the young women's strawweight division in the UFC. But yeah, again, great set of scraps on the prelims and throughout the entire card for UFC on Fox 17.
Yeah, and that brings us to the lightweight fight. I was saying before the podcast, I think we both picked Diaz. I know I did. Maybe you did too. But Nate Diaz, it's so tough to predict the sort of fights that he is going to be in. He embarrasses Cerrone, then makes Jim Miller bite his own tongue off. Then two pretty convincing one-sided losses to Bendo and Josh Thompson. Essentially retires Gray Maynard. Looks completely just underprepared for Rafael dos Anjos. Gets bullied for 3 rounds. And against Michael Johnson was a big underdog. Early on in the fight, it looked like Johnson had the control. I think I scored the first round 10-9 Johnson, even though Diaz had his moments. I think cracked Johnson toward the end of the first round. But that second and third round, man, Diaz looked more like he did in his Cerrone fight, just bullying Johnson around the ring and not only landing at will, but taking time out to point and laugh at Johnson and talk shit and throw a few of those Stockton slaps. Um, Man, Johnson, this is one of those fights where Diaz looks so good, and you don't know whether to count it up toward the brilliance of Nate Diaz's game, or whether it was the other guy being off, because it's not Diaz barely edging him out, it's Diaz just clearly getting under the guy's skin and dominating. Diaz easily won the second and third round, won the fight. The fight won fight of the night, probably just because of Diaz's antics, just eating everything Diaz threw. Before we talk about what's next for both guys, what did you think of the fight?
Well, as a notorious Diaz mark, I was eating this up. I cannot believe it. This was one of my favorite performances of Nate's career. He came out and put it on Michael Johnson. As you said, Johnson probably had the better part of that first round in his pocket. He was definitely doing good. He was showing off the refinements he's been making over there with the Black Zillions camp over the years. But as you mentioned, Diaz, he started to find that rhythm a little bit late in the first round, but then second and third round, he came out and he was locked in. And the Stockton slap was in full effect. He was hitting the b-boy stance in the middle of the fight, just straight clowning Johnson. I couldn't believe it. And the combos he was putting on him too, it was I mean, I don't want to say it was worthy of mocking, but my goodness, he was able to just land at will, putting the 1-2s on him, and he was even able to triple up, get 3 and 4 punches in on some of the combinations, and then he come back and just be clowning Michael Johnson. I could not believe it. Nate Diaz just was truly in pristine, vintage Nate Diaz form. I was incredibly appreciative of this fight. And Nate Diaz, another guy that was a big underdog to Michael Johnson. Granted, you go into that fight, and it seems like Michael Johnson has the tools to get it done, but really Nate Diaz, regardless of the fights he's been in previously, I mean, he's only lost to the top guys who are current or former champions. And he himself has incredible tools. His cardio, his boxing. He's still a very tall competitor, and that's also
The
something that helped him.
jiu-jitsu.
The jiu-jitsu. I mean, he is a threat everywhere. He looks for the finish, and it was a fantastic performance from Nate. You either get the finish or you have a decision like what you got against Michael Johnson. A pristine performance, really.
And Joe Rogan checked in with Nate Diaz after the fight on Fox. This is on, Fox, where you can't say any curse words because you're on Big Fox. Let's see how much Nate Diaz cared about the fact that he was on Big Fox.
A beautiful performance against a very tough guy in Michael Johnson. How do you feel about it? Fuck that. Conor McGregor, you're taking everything I work for, motherfucker. Your fucking ass. You know what's the real fight? What's the real money fight? Is me. Not these clowns that you already punked at the press conference. Don't no one want to see that. You know you beat them already. That's the easy fight. We want that real shit right here. Hey, and unfortunately, we can't talk like that on Fox. Congratulations, Nate, on a spectacular victory. Nate Diaz.
And a big smile on Nate's face as he gives Joe Rogan a little dap. Man, how can you not love people who are that real? He gets the mic from Rogan. Fuck that. That's the first thing he says. Such a vintage Diaz moment, As much as people sort of are perplexed and weirded out and sort of turned off by Sage Northcutt for being so blatantly fake and scripted and not genuine. You gotta love Diaz for the same reason people hate Northcutt, because Nate Diaz, no matter when you hear an interview from him, whether it's pre-fight, post-fight, in training camp, you are getting unfucking filtered what he's thinking. You folks who don't like Nick Diaz, I do not get, because those guys are so easy to love and root for. But that brings us to Michael Johnson and Nate Diaz. What happens for him next? This actually vaulted Nate Diaz up the lightweight rankings from 15 to 8. Michael Johnson stays at 6. I don't want to say it's an easy matchup for me, but if I'm UFC matchmaker, to me there are two fights clearly that you make now. One fight is Donald Cerrone and Michael Johnson. The UFC likes to put guys who've won their last fight against guys who have won, and you could guess because of that they like guys who just lost against other guys who just lost. Cerrone's 3, Johnson's 6. Both of them are coming off of losses. Make them fight one another. The winner is back in the top 5 at lightweight, as they probably should be, and the loser has a 2-fight losing streak to deal with, and the road's going to be a little bit longer for him. For Nate Diaz, man, as you could hear, he just called out Conor. I don't think you make that fight, and as much as the UFC might be tempted to make that fight, because God damn, would that be thrilling. I actually heard Joe Rogan on their recap podcast with Brendan Schaub and Eddie Bravo. They were theorizing what it would be like with, I think it was Brendan Schaub who said, yeah, Nate Diaz isn't gonna let Conor get in his face and start screaming, or else that dude's gonna get hit in the jaw. Which is very true. I mean, that would be a very compelling matchup. Just, I don't know, personally, I think you gotta give Frankie Edgar the fight, and if you don't, it's gotta be because Conor's fighting for the 55 belt. I think if I'm a matchmaker, there are only 2 options next for Conor: Dos Anjos or Edgar, and I make the Edgar fight, knowing too that once you get Edgar out of the way, if you can get him out of the way, then there will be a little time for featherweight to really generate a true number 1 contender that Conor hasn't already beaten. I think Aldo needs a little time off. Mendez now coming off 2 straight losses to Conor and Edgar. If Conor's able to hand Edgar a loss, that would make sense for the featherweights to sort of reestablish themselves, and maybe Holloway steps up as a guy who gets the shot. I don't know, but I really think you got to give Frankie the fight next against Conor, as much as Nate versus Conor would sell. So if I'm UFC matchmaker, making Johnson versus Cerrone, and for Nate Diaz, how about a fight against Tony Ferguson? How fucking fun would Nate Diaz versus Tony Ferguson? Stylistically, it would almost be like they're looking in a mirror at one another. Both of them deadly off their backs. Both of them have shown tremendous striking. The only real difference would be, I guess, their personality, which that aspect is maybe polar opposite. You have Ferguson, a guy who's usually quiet, who's usually not shit-talking a whole bunch, against Nate Diaz, where, he and his brother almost have to develop a hatred for their opponent every time they go in the cage. So I'm making Johnson, Cerrone, and Diaz, Ferguson here. What do you think is next for either guy?
Ooh, well, you know what? I think those are fantastic matchups right there. I think you would not be disappointed if either of those were made. Kind of in that same sentiment with guys on losing streaks fighting guys on losing streaks. I wouldn't mind seeing Michael Johnson fight the loser of the Pettis Alvarez fight. Um, that would be a couple losses in a row for whoever does end up losing that fight. But still a decent name that Michael Johnson could contend with to try and get himself back up into the rankings. Um, that's just my personal opinion. And then as far as Diaz goes, I Diaz versus Ferguson would be sick. That would be a crazy fight. Um, However, with the way that the Dos Anjos fight played out, the way he just, well, we'll get into that fight. With the way that played out, I would like to see Tony Ferguson actually get that title shot. Um, he's got a great string of wins going there. He's just been getting better and better. He's one of the last tough winners that just has kept improving and is really he's looking like he's ready to go for that title shot. I want to say, as you mentioned, Jake. Normally, he stays very reserved. Typically speaking, on the microphone, pre and post fight, definitely sportsmanlike on the mic. Um, he did have some missteps on the Ultimate Fighter, and definitely seems to be much more politically correct and sportsmanlike about the way he conducts himself, and I applaud him for that. And I think he's ready to go for that championship fight. So, be that as it may, I'd like to see Nate Diaz perhaps take on Habib Nurmagomedov when he comes back. I want to say he was slated for March return, if I'm not mistaken. Knowing Diaz, that I think he'd be up for that fight. Of course, he wants a Conor McGregor fight. Like you, I think McGregor should be fighting Frankie Edgar. Um, I really hope they're not doing an immediate rematch with Aldo, but I dare say I would even prefer that over Conor McGregor fighting either Diaz or Rafael Dos Anjos. I don't know. That's just me personally. Let him put in at least one defense down there in featherweight before he goes up. Um, yeah, so there's a ton of options for either fighter, but I'd like to see Diaz versus Nurmagomedov. That'd be a good test for both fighters.
Ooh, I like that fight too. Diaz versus Nurmagomedov. Let's get to the main event, or the co-main event. Sorry, Alistair Overeem versus Junior Dos Santos. Another pretty sizable underdog victory. Alistair Overeem, I I think most fight prognosticators looked at his most recent losses and said, "Damn, look at that chin." His last three losses have come to Ben Rothwell, Travis Brown, and Bigfoot Silva via KO or TKO, and all of these came in 2013 or more recently. You know who hits harder than all those guys? Junior Dos Santos. And you know who has not lost a fight in the UFC outside of matches against Cain Velasquez? Junior Dos Santos. So, to me at least, it seemed like a obvious given that Junior Dos Santos was going to beat Alistair Overeem. Not so fast. Once again, we see the brilliance of Greg Jackson. Overeem going in there with a perfect game plan. I mean, first round, this wasn't a fluke KO. The first round, Overeem won it. I mean, Overeem's blocking kicks, showing these awesome strikes. His boxing looked good. He had a step in knee in the first round that just blasted the gut of JDS. I mean, the first round wasn't completely one-sided. I don't want to make it sound like, Junior was getting his ass kicked, but I still scored it a 10-9 Ream, especially in the last stanza of that first round. But yeah, Reem was chopping at the legs. Just his hands were landing. And then toward the end of the second round, Reem charges forward, lands a left hook, hits him right on the jaw. Junior is on his back, rolls to his knees, 3 or 4 hammer fists before Dan Miraglata steps in. Junior wasn't that happy with the stoppage. It wasn't the most definitive stoppage ever, but I'm not saying it was an early stoppage either. I can see why you stopped that fight, and I think even if this went the full 3 rounds, I think this would have been Overeem's fight too. But yeah, Alistair Overeem looking impressive in a win against Junior Dos Santos. Sort of like the other fight, not many people were giving him a chance. And you got to think that this puts Alistair Overeem. You've got this title rematch with Verdum and Velasquez. Overeem is up there. It's Overeem, Stipe, and Andre. As far as who's next in line, I don't know. I don't know what will exactly happen because, of course, we've got to see Verdum versus Velasquez 2 on Super Bowl weekend. How they're going to shuffle out the heavyweights. But this, man, I feel like just a year ago when Alistair Overeem lost to Ben Rothwell, we were saying it's time to hang it up. You just got KO'd by Rothwell in the first round, and you're 1-3 in your last 4 fights. Look at Overeem now. He's on a 3-fight winning streak. He is one of the next few guys in line for a title shot. I don't know if he gets a title shot next. I guess we will talk about that next. But what did you make of this fight, Junior versus Overeem? Seeing shades of old Pride level. And this is Reem off of the juice, which is even more impressive. It was funny. I think I may have been listening to The Fighter and the Kid. And Brendan Schaub called Overeem and Belfort the Batman and Robin of TRT. And just, seeing his body shape swell up from middleweight. I think he fought at middleweight in Pride, swelling up to where he weighed 255, and then shrinking back down. This is an Overeem that I thought we might see fall off the face of the earth with more drug testing. And I heard a lot of fight predictors saying that the drug testing would lead to an easy Junior Dos Santos win. No, Overeem went in with an awesome game plan. Shout out to the best pound-for-pound coach in the sport, Greg Jackson. And Reem walks away champion on the co-main event. Well, what did you think of the fight?
Well, you know what, Jake? I think you're definitely right. It was a great game plan that Jackson had drawn up for Overeem, and both fighters, Junior Dos Santos as well, they were definitely fighting smart. That first round, I must say, I couldn't even judge that fight myself. It was quite boring to my taste. It was just so slow. Granted, I might have just been spoiled. There were so many great submissions leading up to, or submissions and knockouts leading up to that. It was just a fantastic card the whole way through that first round. I was just spoiled by that point. And this is high level, especially heavyweight mixed martial arts. So there's an extended feeling out process. It was more like a feeling out round here. I could definitely see how you would give that to Overeem. I was very surprised, though. I thought Junior Dos Santos would be able to get in there at some point and put hands on Overeem, but he just was not. Overeem, he was able to use that K1 Grand Prix Championship expertise there. And Junior Dos Santos, he's got great hands. He's got great boxing. We've seen him employ it many times and in most of his fights in the UFC. But, gosh, even if you look at his fight against Stipe Miocic, which he won, he was still battered in that fight. He was battered quite badly. And Alistair Overeem is a guy with much better technical striking all the way around. Just that is his area of expertise. And Junior Dos Santos is not a fighter that goes in any fight looking to shoot for a takedown. That's never what he's been known for. I don't recall ever seeing him do it. Junior Dos Santos is looking to stand, and this is a guy that simply had him outgunned. And the theory was, Jake, as you had mentioned, that Overeem's chin just wouldn't hold up. At some point, Junior Dos Santos would reach out and touch Alistair Overeem, and that would be the end of the fight. But Alistair Overeem, he was able to just not be there. He was able to fight that smart game plan, and man, he was that shot that he landed. I was kind of on the fence about the stoppage myself. I could see that going either way. I mean, I'm never going to argue against fighter safety. Fighter safety definitely should be number one. And the shot that he took from Alistair Overeem, my goodness, Dos Santos, he was probably concussed from that blow, and he was starting to come to, and he was getting back to his feet. But I think he was getting back to his feet more quickly because Dan Miragliotta had pulled him off and was stopping Alistair Overeem from continuing to strike him even further. It was not a good state and not a good place, and especially for these heavyweights, um, that could be a lot of unnecessary punishment being saved. And again, the shot that he took, I mean, if you go back, I'm sure anybody, you can find that highlight on YouTube anywhere. And it was, there's got to be, what do they call it? The Phantom Cam, the Fox Phantom Cam or something. There's got to be Phantom Cam footage of that knockout somewhere. Oh my goodness. Um, traumatic brain injury there. Just that skull, um, that brain was bouncing off that skull like a pinball in a pinball machine or something like that. Not a bad stoppage there, and good showing for Junior Dos Santos. Definitely surprised. That's three wins in a row now. Like he said, a guy that was being written off quite recently, and yeah, it's definitely hard to pick a guy when he was KO'd by Big Ben Rothwell. Um, wow, quite a fight.
Quite a fight indeed, and I talk about Overeem being in the top three for the championship next. Who do you make for either guy? This is pretty tough. Do you I mean, shit. I do you give Reem the title shot next? Do you give I just don't know what to do. I feel like the way the UFC has always seemed to really want to give Reem the best fight available, I have a feeling that Reem's next fight might be for the title. What do you think next is for Alistair?
Well, that certainly would be a bad route to go. I mean, I think certainly there's a good contingent of fans that have wanted that fight as well. And now with the increased drug testing and everything like that, there could be the semblance of getting an Alistair Overeem fighting clean for the UFC Heavyweight Championship, and that's an exciting prospect. I'm sure a lot of people are willing to forgive and forget quite easily with Overeem, as long as he keeps making the people happy and knocking people out and all that good stuff. They will forget his prior transgressions, and hey, 'tis the season. Jake, it is the holiday episode of the MMA podcast after all, and I could see him getting booked to fight the winner of Cain Velasquez versus Fabricio Verdum too. That fight is coming up fairly quickly here, I want to say, and the timing is right there. However, I certainly wouldn't mind if they give one of these more resurgent guys just coming back. If Arlovsky is able to win his next fight, would not mind seeing him in there for the title either. He left the UFC championship and left the UFC on a win streak. Um, I think that would be a great selling point as well. There's a lot of hype behind that. It's a good story, just seeing what he's been able to do. So there's a lot of different ways, but Alistair Overeem, if he doesn't get the championship fight, um, man, I'm sure he'd like to run back one of those losses, but if that opportunity isn't available, oh my goodness, I think. Well, actually, I think that's probably the fight you have to make. I'm trying to think of anybody he hasn't fought, and I'm pretty sure he hasn't fought Cain Velasquez, and he has not fought Fabricio Verdum in the UFC. So why not make it happen?
Yeah, we'll see what the UFC does as far as future opponents for Junior and Alistair. Man, this main event fight, Rafael Dos Anjos and Donald Cerrone, I didn't think it was going to get stopped that quick. It only lasted a minute. And honestly, it was a minute of Cerrone just kind of getting blasted the whole time. Cerrone never had the champion in danger. Was just covering up, getting blasted. This was all Dos Anjos. I mean, that's all I can really say. You know, he's staggering around, was on the fence, came to the center of the cage, gets literally pushed to his knees and punched on the mat before Herb Dean steps up to rescue a turtled up Donald Cerrone. Rafael Dos Anjos with his first title defense in 66 seconds via TKO. Fuck, man. I don't know what else to say about this fight other than for all the fans saying Dos Anjos with the new USADA rules was going to look like a shadow of himself. They're all eating crow now because Rafael looked like a beast. And whoever he fights next better really study up on him, or they're not going to be walking into a very good situation. This was a very one-sided fight. Well, what did you think of the fight?
Man, I mean, there's not a whole lot to think of it. Dos Anjos came in there, barnstorm, and just came in like a buzzsaw and absolutely just ate Donald Cerrone up. It was ridiculous how quick this fight went down. He had him hurt to the body, and that was really a big part of what ended up being his demise. He was so hurt to the body. He ended up getting pieced up. Some good combos were being landed on, some good headshots. Dos Anjos was landing there, and it was a great performance by the champ. And like you said, this is a guy. A lot of people for years, I want to say 3 or 4 years now, I've been hearing people talking about how Dos Anjos has been one of those guys just juicing to the gills. But I mean, these new testing rules are in play, and he has not popped hot yet. And he's been coming out looking just phenomenal as of late. I don't even know. I think the real issue might be that titanium chin or whatever he had put in after Clay Guida broke his jaw. I mean, my goodness. I think that might be a serious competitive advantage there, honestly. Just knowing, man, you're not going to knock me out or break my jaw again. That's reinforced. So I think that might be somewhat of an issue legitimately there. But as far as the juicing concerns, we would just I mean, until he pops hot with this new testing, and as a champion there's going to be an abundance of it. Until that day, we'll just have to let that slide, because right now he's making good with it. So yeah, it was just a great performance. His striking has really come around. He's been with Rafael Cordero, I want to say it is. He's been training with over there, King's MMA, and renowned striking coach, and he's really been putting it together along with his grappling resume. And he's always been really well known as a strong grappler, a physically strong as well as technically proficient grappler, which is one reason a lot of people have been making those claims. I've heard people who, oh, I know this dude who trains at this gym, and he's like, oh man, no, Dos Anjos is so strong, he's juicing, blah 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 blah. The people have been saying that for a long time, but he's really got the all around package, and he's just had to show off the striking in this case, and it was a hallmark performance for Rafael Dos Anjos in his beginning championship career.
Yeah, man, it was a hell of a scrap. I already talked about Cerrone, who he should get next, but what next for RDA? I feel like there's one of three options. Either it's McGregor, it's the winner of Pettis and Alvarez, or it's Tony Ferguson. I could see Ferguson. Ferguson would make sense, even though I just matched him up against Diaz. I guess I'll go with the winner of Alvarez-Pettis. I think Pettis was just so dominant over everyone. Maybe a win against Alvarez earns him another crack at that title. I think Pettis has maybe done more with a win over Alvarez to deserve it over Ferguson. Man, this is tough though. It's very close. Who do you think should step up next for the 155 belt?
I think you're right on point there, Jake. If Anthony Pettis is able to defeat Eddie Alvarez in their upcoming bout, I think Pettis should be able to get the crack. This is a case where a champion not getting an immediate rematch. For whatever reason it may be, we saw Renan Barão get just as dominated by TJ Dillashaw over 5 rounds, and yet they made that rematch. But be that as it may, if Pettis is able to get at least that one win over Eddie Alvarez, he's a very highly credentialed fighter and definitely top tier in the UFC 155-pound division. If Pettis is able to get that win and look as impressive as he has in all of his other performances, no reason for him to not get another crack at that championship. He arguably, I mean, if everybody else is getting these immediate rematches, I mean, he did not get one himself. So I think one victory over a solid competitor like Eddie Alvarez, that could do the trick. If not, I definitely think Ferguson is a good go-to choice for the next contender for the belt. Tony Ferguson, he's definitely looking like a threat. He's got much improved jiu-jitsu. He's got solid jiu-jitsu himself. The striking's really coming along. He's a young fighter. I definitely think he would give Dos Anjos some problems in that fight. He's super aggressive, just like Dos Anjos has been in his last couple fights. So I think that would just be a fireworks fight. Always a host of options in the UFC's lightweight division. And I can't wait to see what they do for Dos Anjos there.
And I think that wraps it up for UFC on Fox for us. And actually, this will be a short podcast, I guess, sort of to make up for last week's marathon podcast. Only one bit of news I want to talk about, which is pretty big news. One Championship, the big MMA organization over in Asia, rolling out a new weigh-in program, challenging the UFC to follow suit. ONE FC had a fighter a couple weeks ago who missed weight, or I don't know if he missed weight or not, but because of trying to make weight, the guy died. Very tragic, and ONE FC obviously reacting from that. This is a really long presser, and I'll try and sum it up. But basically their new program, which is the first of its kind in combat sports, is focused on athletes safely by introducing, quote, walking weight competition via multiple weigh-ins and tests before and during fight week, including 3 hours before an event begins. Athletes will now compete at their walking weight, which will be determined by a robust system that will track his or her weight on a regular basis throughout the period that athlete is contracted to ONE Championship. Full details of the new weigh-in program can be found below, and it is pretty complicated. You have, it's paragraphs. You've got athletes being weighed 3 hours before the fight, 8 weeks before the fight, making sure that they're fighting at a natural weight and trying to eliminate the weight cutting process. I think this is awesome. I'm still not fully filled in as far as every nook and cranny and detail, but at least ONE FC is trying to cure this problem. The whole weigh-in thing is very weird, how 24 hours before competition, you have guys sucking all the hydration out of their bodies to where they're taking IVs. And we've seen in boxing, fighters die because they suck so much weight, their brain isn't properly hydrated to go into a fight. And I really just want to tip my hat to ONE FC. We'll see what happens with all the fighters, and this is a legit fighting organization. They have Ben Askren, they have Bibiano Fernandez, they have Shinya Aoki. See what exactly goes down, and if it works with ONE FC, I would love to see the UFC follow suit, because just getting into the sport as an outsider, I've been a huge sports mark my entire life, but it really isn't since the last 7-8 years since I've gotten into mixed martial arts and all that, and I've always sort of thought the weigh-ins and people sucking weight was a bizarre thing and something that in an ideal world we wouldn't have to do. And maybe this is just getting one step closer to having an ideal weight system where we don't have, a bunch of fighters backstage who are drawn out and their bodies are in need of water just 24 hours before they're going out and fighting in front of millions, for their contracts, their lives. I think it's really awesome what ONE FC is doing.
Yeah, as do I, Jake. I mentioned it on Twitter. I'm not a doctor, not a fighter, not a physician or a nutritionist, but this definitely seems like a solid, logical option and a great way to go for fighter health and fighter safety. I was taking a little bit of a look at the document, and it seems like they're going to have a lot of check-ins and a lot of weigh-ins. I forget if it was daily, but it's definitely weekly. I want to say at least once a week for the 8 weeks leading into a fight. They have to be within a certain percentage of their projected fighting weight or their alleged walking around weight.
Yeah.
Their walking weight, yes. So they have to be within 8 weeks of a fight. They have to be within a certain percentage. Within 7 weeks, they have to be within a lower percentage, and so on and so forth. It has to be within a
6, then
decreasing
4,
percentage.
then 3, yeah.
Yeah, so it's basically it looks to me just trying to make sure that they are getting down to their projected walking weight in a healthy manner. It had mentioned that there's going to be urinalysis weekly. Again, I'd have to double check the document to see if it's even more periodically than weekly, but at least weekly urinalysis check just to make sure they're going to check
they're checking these specific gravity hydration tests. I mean, they're going deep with this.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's going to ensure your proper organ function there, and it seems like a great step. UFC, former UFC middleweight champion Rich Franklin, I want to say he's a vice president in some capacity over there at One Fighting Championship, and he helped with this. I don't want to call it a bill. I'm not quite what to call it. With instituting this new policy, I want to say I don't know to what extent here, but I do believe he helped develop this or implement this in some form. And with someone like that to go to for advisement, as well as the panel of doctors that they stated to have gotten from both the U.S. as well as Asia, seems like a good way to go. And I mean, just looking at it logically, I think seems like a decent plan. Again, I'm not a physician or a doctor or a fighter myself, but it seems like a solid way to go. I know a lot of people, especially from the wrestling community, are accustomed to this weight cutting lifestyle and the way that it's done. And there are a lot of people that preach a quote unquote proper way to do it, but I mean, it certainly seems safer and just more natural to do this kind of walking weight system. As a fan, which is really the only perspective I'm qualified to comment on this particular issue, but as a fan perspective, I do not mind seeing this walking weight thing. I think, hey, sounds like a fair competition. Let's see who is the best fighting, or who is the best fighter fighting at their, what I would say seems to be their most natural weight. Seems like a great way to go.
Yeah, it seems like it is the good way to go, because it's only a matter of time before we see such a tragedy happen in the UFC unless we start really changing things around. We see fighters who struggle to walk to this scale. I mean, shit. Even Conor McGregor, the face of the sport, when he weighs in at 145, that guy looks like a skeleton. It'll be interesting how ONE FC does this. Maybe Conor's smart to go after multiple weight classes, because honestly, this would make a lot of guys have to bump up. And I don't know, maybe Conor isn't able to stay at 145 if the UFC were to adopt these kinds of regulations. Really just this is a risky move. This is a move that's going to have a lot of fighters saying what the fuck. It might shuffle up the title picture at a lot of different weight classes. It's a risky move, it's a ballsy move, and I think ONE FC took a move toward the future and toward fighter safety. And, with all this Reebok stuff, where our biggest criticism of the UFC is, oh, you're not looking out for the fighters, you're just looking out for yourselves. It's really refreshing to see a fighting promotion looking out for the fighters. And, man, I would absolutely love if this started bringing more elite fighters over to ONE FC, more clean fighters, more fighters who wanted to fight guys who were their size. ONE FC is doing it right, and credit Franklin and all the guys over there, Victor Cooey, for doing it right. It was a slow news week. I don't have anything else. I think Yoel Romero, I think it was announced he's going to get the next title shot against Rockhold. I believe that recently came down the pipe. What do you think about Romero Rockhold?
Oh, I think that's a solid fight. I'm kind of surprised Weidman isn't getting the immediate rematch here.
I am too, yeah.
But hey, I cannot complain. Yoel Romero, that fight with Souza, man, that was a close one.
Souza got robbed.
Don't say robbed, Jay. Come on, not robbed.
Bank robbery.
That was a close one. Two very high-level competitors, and that's what we're going to get in this title fight. This is going to be...
And I'll rarely ever call a 29-28 a robbery, but the conviction I had Jacare, Yoel definitely won the first round with that spinning fist. But I thought Jacare so easily won those second two rounds. I'm calling it highway robbery of the third degree, cocksucker.
Oof, my goodness, Jake.
I think is third degree the worst? Is it like first, second, third, or is it the opposite way? Is first degree the worst?
No, it would be first degree. Jesus Christ, Jake.
I'm in law school. I should know
You're in
this.
law school,
yeah.
homie. Why are you asking me, dog?
I ain't take that class yet, cocksucker.
Hey, that's all right. Don't ask me why I'm so familiar with the U.S. legal system. Anyhow, I'm looking forward to this fight. Yoel Romero, he is a beast. Luke Rockhold, he is a beast. He's really been putting it all together. He's got the highest level training partners. Definitely seems like a guy. He's grinding, and he's putting in that work. He's got fantastic striking, fantastic grappling acumen. Yoel Romero, though, he's coming in. He's coming in with those credentials. He's coming in with those strong credentials, and he's coming in with that power. He's got some good power in that boxing. He's shown devastating ground and pound, and that's the thing. If he can get you down to the ground, can he unleash that ground and pound on you? Because Luke Rockhold doesn't want any part of those elbows.
Do you give Yoel a chance against Luke? I'm saying right now he doesn't have a chance against Luke Rockhold.
I'm giving him a chance. I'm giving him a chance against Luke. Do I think Rockhold is the favorite and the rightful favorite? Absolutely. He's the rightful champion, and he should be the rightful favorite in this fight. And he's certainly... I like to give it to the fighter that has more ways to win. Traditionally speaking, that's the way I like to predict a fight. And I would say Luke Rockhold seems to have more ways to win this fight. Striking, more diverse. He's going to hit you with the kicks, knees, elbows. He's got the 8 points, and he's proficient at just about all of them. He's very accurate, and he's got some pop to his shots too. So he's got everything very well rounded in the striking department. And again, he's got a great class of grapplers with him, Daniel Cormier. So he's training with Olympic caliber wrestlers, which Yoel Romero is a very, granted you could say Yoel Romero is a more accomplished wrestler than Daniel Cormier is. Their track records speak for themselves. Both are highly decorated in the freestyle wrestling category. But Luke Rockhold, he's there. He's getting that training. He's training with DC. He's training with Cain Velasquez. He's training with a lot of great guys overall, aka they're deep, and he definitely has what it takes. But Romero, I would have to say he's got to have the ground / grappling advantage, just because you train with these people, and granted, he was able to do well against Chris Weidman, but even Weidman was having his success until I'd say that spinning back kick attempt was just the downfall of everything. But Weidman was able to implement his grappling game for portions of that fight, so there is a shot there for Romero. But specifically, I think the big issue, as even Luke Rockhold pointed out when talking to Yoel during the post-fight press conference for UFC 194, he told him, he said, you better get your cardio up. And that is for sure. If Romero wants to go in there with Luke Rockhold, he better get ready for a hard 5. He better get ready for a strenuous, I think if Romero is going to win this fight, he needs to grapple it out, and he needs to be ready for a contentious fight everywhere the fight goes. I'm giving him a shot here, but smart money, I would say, is on Rockhold, but you certainly can't sleep on Romero. I wouldn't expect the betting lines. I'd have to put this within minus plus 200 both ways.
And what's interesting now, I feel like this fight announcement gives a fight that's already been announced a lot more attention. Because now Weidman has lost in his last fight, and he's not getting a rematch. Jacare has lost in his last fight, and apparently you're making Yoel Romero versus Luke Rockhold. To me, at least, that means that a UFC 197 fight that's going to be going down in March, a fight we touched on maybe a month or two ago, Anderson Silva versus Vitor Belfort. To me, that's now a number 1 title contendership match. If you're not going to give Weidman the immediate rematch, that means he's going to need to fight someone else, get a win or 2. The same for Jacare. Luke is calling out for a fight against Vitor. Vitor is fighting Silva in March. I assume Rockhold will fight Romero sometime early 2016. That, to me, aligns a crash course. UFC 200, the winner of Rockhold and Romero against the winner of Vitor versus Anderson. Anderson Rockhold would sell so much. The old champ against the new champ. How can Luke do against the Spider Silva? Can the Silva get his belt back? And the storyline's just as compelling if Vitor somehow wins that fight. I'm not sure what the line is on that fight, or if it's even been set yet. I'll look that up now. Let's see, future events, UFC 197. I'm not seeing a line for that yet. But I feel like, to me, now that you've announced Yoel Rockhold, that means Silva Belfort 2 will probably be a number 1 contenders matchup.
No, I think that's a very interesting point there, Jake. I'm sure the UFC would not mind getting Anderson Silva back in there for a championship shot, even though he was unsuccessful in his rematch attempt against Chris Weidman.
He's
Anderson
only lost
Silva,
to one guy in the UFC.
Very true, and
both
that guy,
of them, and as much as I don't want to take away any sort of credence to Weidman for beating him, even as a Weidman fan, which I'm not, but even if you are, I am, but I'm not like a hardcore Weidman fan like Ross Finkelstein and Jew or anything. Even if you're a hardcore Weidman fan, I do think Weidman more times than not beats Silva, but at the same time, you watch those fights, and you gotta admit, those were two finishes. One Silva dancing around, getting caught in a moment of irony as far as charisma goes, and the other time, breaking his leg, Corey Hill style, on Weidman's knee. Both of them ended bizarrely. Fluky might be the wrong word, but both of them ended in strange fashion. And I think the UFC would love, especially if Luke wins, to match Vitor or Anderson up against them, whoever wins that fight in Brazil in March.
Yeah, that would certainly not be a bad matchup. I mean, as you said, there's definitely great marketing angles for either person that wins that fight. And Anderson Silva having only lost to Weidman, I mean, Luke Rockhold, he's holding the title right now. So, and stylistically, that's a great matchup. They're very similar builds, both very tall, lanky for 185 pounds. Both great striking skill sets and both certainly proficient on the ground. So I think that would be a fantastic one. And certainly the revenge angle, Luke Rockhold versus Vitor Belfort, which I know our buddy Ramsey's, man, who we haven't talked to in forever. I
haven't spoken with that. I mean, shit, we haven't had him on the podcast in months.
Yeah, no, it was
shout out to Ramses with the hip surgery. Wherever you are, we hope you're feeling better, buddy.
God bless. God bless. I'm sure he's got a bunch of Thai prostitutes. It's all good.
Hell yeah. At the Aunt Jimmy Show on Twitter.
Yes, indeed. I know he was very skeptical of that fight. I was very skeptical of that fight as well. I thought Rockhold should have had that fight, really. It'll be good to see how that one goes down. If they ever do get a chance to run that one back. Does not necessarily seem like those two are on a crash course to meet each other again. But, hey, if Vitor Belfort is able to avenge one of his most recent losses to Anderson Silva, well, gosh, although I guess that was, 3-4 years ago now, that front kick, that was thunderous. The front kick heard around the world.
Yeah, it was.
If he's able to get that avenge that loss, maybe he'll be able to prove that that first victory over Luke Rockhold was not a fluke, and go for that championship belt. So, both guys definitely benefiting. I mean, Anderson Silva and Vitor Belfort both having lost to Chris Weidman, definitely benefiting by him not being the champion anymore. So I could certainly see how they could put one of them in there for title contention, although the prospect of a Jacare Weidman match to determine number one contender is also quite plausible, I'd say. But definitely could see the UFC hype machine loving that Anderson Vitor rematch a lot more right now.
Yeah, it's the beautiful thing. Anything could happen, and we might not always agree with which way Zuffa goes. Man, it's been a fun 2015. Speaking of which, tune in next week. We will be back in Studio 15, so we will be doing the show live. We will be taking calls. Not sure if that will go down the 30th. It'll probably either be the 30th, that Wednesday night, or on the 1st. And we're looking for it to be yours truly and our boy P Money and the J Jeans. I'm trying to get our buddy from over in the UK to join us for next week's show, which will be the 2015 The MMA Podcast Awards, the TMP Awards, the 4th annual TMP Awards. We've done it 2012, 2013, 2014, and man, it's wild. We've been doing this show long enough to say it's the 4th annual TMPs, but we are doing it. We're doing Fighter of the Year, Knockout of the Year, Fight of the Year, Submission of the Year, Most Improved Fighter of the Year, Most Disappointing Fighter of the Year, Card of the Year. If you have any nominations for any of those categories or any ideas for any other categories we should do, Camp of the Year, Trainer of the Year, it is all up to you, the fans. So tweet us. What did you think was the best fight of 2015? Who was the best fighter of this year? What was the craziest knockout? And we had a few crazy knockouts. What was the biggest what the fuck moment of 2015? Holm versus Rousey. We had so so many moments where we were just like, oh my god. Any award category, any award winner, we are open. And we will have the Twitter lines open. We will have the phone lines open whenever we do it. Follow us on Twitter at The MMA Podcast to stay tuned as far as when we will do it. TheMMApodcast.com, of course. I want to thank Santa Claus for calling in. High to the gills on black tar heroin. That was borderline depressing if Santa wasn't so entertaining. Yeah, it was crazy. Pat, you have anything to shout out to the good people who decided to listen all the way through on this 152nd edition of the MMA Podcast? My fucking nasally ass talking for 1.5 hours. I do apologize. I hope it's a little clearer next week.
Lord willing, it'll clear.
Merry Christmas, people.
Merry Christmas, everybody, and really everybody that listened to us. We really appreciate it. That's especially this time of year. You are our most loyal and our most favorite of listeners. Although we do favor all of our listeners, those of you that are checking this out,
especially our female listeners.
God bless you. Merry Christmas, and God bless. Hope everybody has a happy New Year, and we will be hollering at you. End of 2015, first thing 2016. Thank you so much. Always a pleasure, Jake. And looking forward to a fantastic new year here.
TMP Awards, look out for it next week. Thank you for listening. Once again, shout out to Santa Claus for calling in. Shout out to P Money for being an excellent co-host and bringing us in to 2016. I hope wherever you are, whether you're having good times with family, sketchy times with family, it's the holidays. It can be a stressful time. We hope we were able to put a smile on your damn face, and we will be back next week for the TMP Awards. We love the shit out of you, and until next week, we gone.
Shout out to Jake. Tune into the MMA Podcast every Tuesday night.
Got the wild style, always been a foul child.
Will I, sucker? I be the coming like Noah.
The MMA Podcast, Jake is the host. And since Ramsey's been in a wheelchair, the Aunt Jimmy Show has been on a roll. I wanna say John Jones is a host, so I think that I'll pick up the phone and dial 213-457-3380. We got hot takes on the show. You get blood on your clothes if you're sitting in the front row. I throw on my gi and then I lace the hoops. I'll have Gal lying down cause he ain't the truth. And if Alan wasn't a cop, I'd mention you. And shout out to Ross Finkelstein, the Jew. Cause according to you, you're an MMA guru. Approved Bisbing lost his hands, Count Dooku. If you're a fancy boy, you get a 2-minute slot. Mystery wants a title shot. So listen to the MMA Podcast. Throw a high kick, but I block that. Call me Diaz, screaming George, where you at? I want the strap. When you know that I'll never tap. So listen to the MMA Podcast. Throw a high kick, but I block that. Call me Diaz, screaming George, where you at? I want the strap. And you know that I won't tap. Mystery. The MMA Podcast. Most of us just live and breathe this fighting shit. Shout out to Jake. Shout out to Jake.